Good day, everyone. So, with yesterday being the 2.5 livestream, I honestly wasn't really going to make a video about it until I saw Ayato's early reveal and his appearance, and kind of just decided that I would make a bit of a video, at least to sort of get his appearance out of the way, so that once he does come out, I've already talked about that and can look at him just from a more objective standpoint in terms of how good or bad he is and slash what type of team he will likely be used in. But honestly speaking, I'm not entirely sure what I expected out of Ayaka's brother, but it definitely wasn't this. Now, to go by parts, his outfit is very Mihoyo, where it's very top-heavy. And by top-heavy, I mean there's loads of stuff going on up here. You know, they spent, like a lot of Genshin characters kind of feel like they spent a week, maybe, designing like the upper half of the character. And then once they finished that, one dude over a lunch break finished off the bottom half. You know, they put all this effort and detail and so on and so forth into creating the upper parts of the body, or the outfit for the upper parts of the body, and then they're just like, yeah, you know, put him in just white dress pants, you know, or some slacks, you know, whatever. In fact, even cut off his jacket. And I just don't really get that. Kind of becoming a little bit annoyed by that. You know, characters like Shenhua, who I feel like could have been a lot cooler looking, just aren't, because they just decided to not bother designing the lower half of the character. And Ayato's outfit very much so falls in this vein. Even if this was just, they extended the jacket here, instead of cutting it off weirdly, they extended it down, so it was kind of like Zhongli's coat, just a Inazuman feel. I think that would have been a massive improvement, just that alone. But instead, they just, I don't know, you just have this. And personally speaking, I just think it's weird. Now, that is honestly the lesser of my issues, because my biggest issues isn't his outfit, but is his model itself. Specifically his hair and his face. Again, I don't know what I was expecting, but it just was not this. In terms of character, this looks like the type of character who's either the calm and kind type, almost motherly, or an immense flirt. And neither of which I don't really think, at least from what we know of him so far, are what Ayato seems to be. You know, Ayato basically seems to be kind of a mischief maker that, because of his role, can't really be that. Instead has to be, you know, this nobleman. And I kind of thought that he would have an appearance more befitting of that. So I expected him to look more, maybe masculine isn't really the right word, but more, at least like more mature. I honestly have a difficult time explaining what exactly I just find wrong with this, to be completely honest. But it just very much so doesn't feel right. And frankly, just from appearance alone, I'm just not interested. I don't know. I would just like to finally get a few male characters in the game that actually look, or at least that I find visually appealing. Until I saw this image of Ayato, I hadn't even really realized that Zhongli is kind of the only male character in the game that I actually like the appearance of. So having come to that realization, you know, makes it even more disappointing that I don't like Ayato. Now, talking about version 2.5, first starting with new weekly boss, or at least I think it's the new weekly boss, where we're fighting the Raiden puppet, which looks awesome. I mean, seriously, it looks so cool. Why can't that be the Raiden that we get when we use our burst? But definitely cool. A little bit disappointing that Yai is the first on the banner, because that means straight out the gate on day one, we're not going to be able to level our talents past 6, and then we're going to have to try to blast through the story quests as soon as possible in order to even level her things. It's just kind of annoying. I do wish that if they're going to release a new weekly boss, the weekly boss and then the character who will now use the materials for the weekly boss don't happen like on the same day. Like, at least if it was staggered to the second half of the update, then you'd have like 3-4 weeks worth of drops, and you don't have to feel like you know, need to just blast through the story. You can just take your time getting through it, as long as you get to it within that first week. But just a little change that I would like to see, and does annoy me a little bit. Now, one of the first things that, after seeing this new weekly boss of fighting the Raiden puppet, made me think of was, perhaps weirdly, and maybe that people have already forgotten, is that for those who kind of, you know, data mined the game. They had initially found that Raiden seemed to have a third passive, just like Kokomi, but this ended up being nothing. And seeing this boss where we're going to be overcoming the puppet Raiden did kind of make me think, is it possible that after doing the story quest, could we actually get that third passive of Raiden's? Now, obviously, I don't actually think that's going to happen, but I think at least it would be cool. And I can understand like people maybe not liking that because like, oh, but if they can make the characters better somewhere down the line, I can understand that. But if you think about it in a different way, if they open up the avenue of adding a third passive talent to characters, that could enable them to make, you know, maybe your favorite character, maybe like Kaching, for example, or something, who just isn't really great, and make them better, make them more comparable to the characters that you're actually using now. And I think that would be pretty cool. Again, with Kaching, you know, maybe she gains a third talent where after using her ultimate, those after images that, you know, are in her splash art and then briefly show up in the animation of her ultimate that have nothing to do with her kit at all, maybe that gets introduced. Maybe for 8 seconds after using her burst, she gains like this electro after image that maybe kind of similar to Razor's burst, adds like 10-20% electro damage to all the normal and charge attack hits that Kaching does, and basically just mirrors her attack. I think that would be really cool. One, just to make the characters more fun, but also giving us the potential to take these characters that aren't so great and lifting them up a little bit. Because let's be honest, at this point, they're just not going to rework characters' kits. It's just not happening. So total wishful thinking. It's not going to happen, but it's just something that I wanted to bring up because for whatever reason, that's one of the first things I thought of upon seeing the Raiden boss. Next thing are some of the other events. We have a very different main event this time round where we are going to seemingly be exploring Enkanomiya again, and seeing as there was like a little bit, I think, in the live stream where you had to unlock a teleport point, I'm guessing it's like we're just totally having to re-explore it, which is interesting. It looks like there's a lot of different things going on, so it looks like we'll have different stuff to do, so that's cool. I'm just not totally sure how the corrosion is going to work because I don't think they go into much detail explaining that, and so that could be something, you know, if it's something more along the lines of, you know, like Dragon Spine, where there's like ways to mitigate it or just not always taking it, you have like a period of time being exposed to it before you start getting corrupted, you know, then I think it would probably be fine. But if it's literally just, it doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, you're just, everybody's dying, not even just the character who's out, like Dragon Spine, right? Just everybody in the party's just constantly dying. That's gonna be rough. Your Kokomi or so on and so forth isn't going to save you because, one, Kokomi's only able to heal the whole party during her burst and if she's hitting something, right? Which isn't just if you're walking around. And her jellyfish only heals the active character and doesn't move, right? So then you're gonna basically have to take breaks. It's like you're walking from, you know, here to there, and then you have to take a break because everyone's basically dead, and then sit there and heal each party member for a while using the jellyfish and then continue on. That's going to be pretty annoying if that ends up being the case, but I shouldn't think that they would make it incredibly painful because unlike, say, the Abyss, where not everybody does it, I do imagine that most people probably do the events, so I shouldn't think that they'd be putting stuff in the major event such that it's so painful that it makes like half the player base just decide to quit the game. So there's some concerns there, but even from just that reason alone, I think it should be fine, and so I'm looking forward to it and expecting it to be a good time. One of the other events to note about is the event where we're making a dungeon. This could be cool, this could be completely dull, who knows, we'll just have to see when it comes out. And so now, talking about Yaimiko, there's a good number of things that are questionable in terms of just, it's difficult to determine from what they showed. The showcase that they did in the live stream of Yaimiko just isn't very good. We don't really have any indication of how, well, first, let's just go through what we do know. Go through her talents one at a time. First, there are her normal attack talents, and some interesting things about them, whereas a lot of the Catalyst characters in the game have like a long-ranged attack, like either Sucrose and can attack just appears on the enemy and it can be from quite quite far away, or something more like Yanfei just slaps a fireball in their general direction. Yaimiko seems to be much more melee. She definitely has more range than a normal melee character, but it's not going to quite have that aspect that a lot of the other Catalyst characters do, where you can safely attack enemies from range, or if the enemy moves a lot, you don't necessarily have to move as much because you can just continue to hit them from wherever you are. Whereas Yaimiko, if you're using her normal and charge attack talents, doesn't really look like she's going to have that luxury. Now, with that being said, they definitely look a lot better. One major issue I have, or probably the biggest issue I have with the Catalyst characters in the game, has nothing to do with like how good they are or so on and so forth. It's simply that they're boring. Most RPGs and so on, I feel, because of the fact that the magic class is not as active as, say more like melee classes and so on and so forth, they counter this by, making impressive looking magical abilities. Whereas in this game, with the Catalyst characters, their abilities are basically as bare bones as could be. They take some tiny little fireball and slap it at the enemy. Or they like, oh, here's a tiny little electric spark. There you go. Or Kokomi, the only 5-star Catalyst that's been released since the start of the game, just slaps some tiny little fish at the enemy that in the midst of combat, at least I can't see. Yaimiko is definitely a step up. Her normal attacks actually look pretty decent. So that's cool. However, there doesn't seem to be anything in her kit from what they mentioned, like say about her passives and so on and so forth, that have anything to do with her normal and charge attack. Generally speaking, with the Catalyst characters, if they're supposed to charge attack, they have some sort of like stamina decrease. Ningguang, you normal attack, you gain one of the jades, and then you can use a charge attack with no stamina cost. Yanfei, you normal attack, gain the seals, which then decreases the amount that your charge attack costs. Klee has some percentage chance of hitting with her skill or normal attacks of making her next charge attack have no cost. And a lot of them isn't just charge attacks, they have to mix in their normal attacks with the charge attacks. So the normal attacks and the charge attacks are very important into their kit. Whereas Yaimiko seems to have nothing to indicate that there's any reason to actually be normal and charge attacking on her, which is definitely a bit disappointing. Especially what they could have done, I feel like, with her elemental skill. But we'll get into that once we get through her elemental skill and her burst. So going into the elemental skill, she seems to be able to drop 3 totems, which look like they just summon a lightning bolt to strike an enemy. Now, this is part of where I was saying the showcase isn't shown very well here, as we have no idea what like the range of this is, nor if this lightning strike it has any area of effect to it at all, or if it's just purely single target. It does kind of look purely single target. And because it's just a lightning strike on an enemy, my guess is that it probably has a pretty significant range, as in the enemies can be pretty significantly far from the totems. And I don't really see an AoE aspect to it at all. Maybe it does, but especially considering that most of the enemies in the game, especially like say in floor 12, are not small. We don't really fight hilly churls and so on and so forth anymore. The enemies have like a decent size. If you have an ability, even if it's slightly AoE, that strikes the enemy, so instead of being around like an AoE around yourself, like Ayaka's elemental skill, it's an AoE around the enemy, it's probably not really going to be able to hit multiple enemies anyway, simply because that the AoE itself might be smaller than the enemies we face themselves. So I'm guessing that this is probably pretty single target. And if it is basically single target, it is going to be, I guess, interesting to see how she kind of compares to Fischl, as Fischl is very similar. She summons Oz, which then shoots something at one enemy once a second. So I would not be at all surprised if Yaimiko's elemental skill basically does the same amount of damage as like a C0 Fischl. And so whether or not she will actually be better than Fischl is going to be how important her elemental burst is in her kit. Now, talking about her elemental burst, it looks like it does an initial hit, and then it will do an additional hit for each totem that is currently out and then destroy those totems. However, it doesn't look like the placement of the totems matters. If you see here and say like this clip against the Mirror Maiden, all the lightning strikes hit in the same spot, whereas I don't think the totems were all placed in that exact same spot. For some people, that might be considered good because like, hey, then the totem placements basically don't matter. Just throw them out there, and then when you want to use your burst, you just use it, and there's no thinking involved at all. But to me, that's my biggest disappointment, I'd say, honestly, with Yaimiko. Well, perhaps actually my second, but we'll get into the other one a bit later. Because totem characters, I feel, are generally pretty technical to play, right? Like, you generally have a totem that you place somewhere, and then you're trying to keep the enemies around that totem, or maybe you place the totems in areas where you think the enemies are going to be. It's generally speaking a playstyle that takes a certain degree of mastery in order to really dish out lots of damage. However, with Yaimiko, assuming that the totems have pretty decent range, she's basically just going to be a character where you just hit her E 3 times, you hit her Q, that resets her E, you hit her E 3 times again, and then you swap off of her and forget about her for a while. And the placements of any of that stuff doesn't matter. Like, the only thing that matters is that when you use the ultimate, you were somewhat close to the enemy. So that means she's a totem character that's basically brain dead, which to me is really disappointing because I really would have rathered a more technical character that is maybe, you know, somewhat difficult to get used to, but feels rewarding once you gain some level of mastery over them. And a way they could have done that, I think, instead of this really weird elemental mastery passive, seriously, I don't understand why they've given her an elemental mastery passive. Maybe her totems have like no ICD, so at least like she's really good in a taser comp, but if her elemental skill has a normal ICD, then she might only apply Electro like once every 3 seconds. And if she only applies Electro once every 3 seconds, she's not going to be particularly good in a taser team. And then why are you building her into elemental mastery? So unless they specifically nerf her attack, so like Utao, where going HP is better because her attack is so low, unless they do that with Yaimiko, or the elemental mastery passive is just so immense, I don't know why you'd actually build her into elemental mastery. It could be different if she was like Cryo, Hydro, or Pyro, but as an Electro character that might not apply Electro very frequently, I don't get that. And so instead of this possibly comparable to Diluc's useless first passive, probably a little bit better, because at least, you know, if you use Sucrose with her, you're getting a damage bonus, right? But even so, instead of that, if they had given it some sort of aspect where for each totem that they have out, when she does a normal attack, each totem will shoot out an additional little fox, which will deal maybe like a third the damage of her normal attacks. And then when she does a charge attack, the totems will do a small AoE around themselves that do maybe like a third the damage of her charge attack. This would enable Yaimiko to, one, be an off-field unit if you wanted to use her that way, but she'd also be a very solid on-field unit that doesn't have some sort of annoying form change where you're just like stuck on the character. You can get onto her, get off of her, get onto her whenever you want, while also having the totem gameplay where the placement of the totems matters. And so each fight that you go into, you're like, okay, so where am I going to put the totems to try to maximize my damage? What am I going to do to try to manipulate the enemy such that they remain in the totems to maximize my damage, right? I think that would have made Yaimiko a really fun character, even if more difficult. Again, you still could use her as a support DPS, because I don't think that elemental mastery passive is going to be incredibly important. I definitely think of having something like that would have made Yaimiko a lot more enjoyable and fun character to use, instead of, at least from what it looks like here, of just a totally brain dead, throw out your E, use your Q, throw out your E, get off of her. So I'm not trying to say that Yaimiko would be bad, because obviously I have no idea. She could be no better than a C0 official, or she could be absolutely monstrous, depending on what her numbers are, right? For that, we'll just have to wait for like 10 days or so. But I just wanted to bring this up because, kind of a bit like Ayato's appearance, I'm just a little disappointed, or significantly disappointed, with Yaimiko's kit. And the other thing, which I alluded to, that I'm disappointed with Yaimiko, is I was irrationally happy when I saw Yaimiko's tails. I was like, oh, tails! And then was immediately crushed after realizing that the tails exist for like a second and then they're gone. That's just... that's just so sad. It's like, why even give it to us if they barely exist? And so that's another thing in which I feel would have been much cooler. You see that Yaimiko gains a single tail when she uses her elemental skill, right? That could be the indicator of how many totems that you currently have out, so that you know how many totems effects you're going to gain from using your normal charge stacks is it could just be how many tails you currently have. As in, you use her elemental skill once, and then for as long as it's out, she has 1 tail. You use her elemental skill a second time, she has 2 tails. And then you use her elemental skill a third time, and she has 3 tails for as long as all 3 totems are on the field. And again, for me, I would have just much rathered that we actually get the tails for like the majority of the time, as opposed to having the tails for like half a second at best. Perhaps a little nitpick, and I don't know why I like the tails so much, to be honest. I'm kind of questioning myself why I find them so appealing. But yeah, just another thing which I feel, once again, easily could have been an improvement, but that for some reason MiHoYo just really doesn't want us to have fun. Don't know why, but just kind of the way it is. And with that, I think that's pretty much all that I have to say about the info we received yesterday. If I missed anything, maybe some quality of life changes or so on and so forth that it seemed particularly important, or just something else that I just skipped over or didn't notice, definitely let me know. What are you thinking about 2.5 so far? Are you looking forward to the events? Are you kind of dreading the corrosion event? Are you also kind of disappointed with the way they've decided to do Yaimiko in terms of her abilities? Would you have liked more usual totem gameplay? Or are you totally cool with the way her kit currently works? You don't really want to have to think. You don't care that the tails aren't out, or maybe you wouldn't even want the tails to be out most of the time anyway. Do you also think it would be cool if after triumphing over the Raiden puppet that Raiden obtains a 3rd passive? Could even be just that, oh hey, now in her burst state, on top of her burst counting as burst damage, it's also normal attack damage. So yay Beidou, or yay Yunjin. Even just that I'd be fine with. And also for Ayato, how do you think of his appearance? Do you think he looks awesome? Are you just about him? Or are you also feeling kinda disappointed or significantly disappointed? Along with anything else that you'd like me to know, as usual, please do let me know down below in the comments. Thank you for watching. Look forward to seeing you again next time, and hope you all have a great day.